Load Cantina Cast Patreon content.
Yo, what's up? Hello,
Yo.
Patreon members.
What's up, Patreon members?
Hello, Jonesy.
Hello, Mr. Albert. How are you today?
Hello, Fraulein. I'm doing good. How about you? How you doing?
Long time no see, man.
Yeah. So welcome to our Patreon episode. This would be
24 hours.
It's been less than 24 hours. Yeah. This would be episode 472. And if you're joining us tonight for the live recording of 472, our Patreon show, this is a little bit of a different format. So a little bit more casual, informal. You don't get the big intro. And but in lieu of that, you get something we call show and tell.
That's right.
And boy, have we got a haul of stuff to show, but we're not going to show everything. We're gonna pace some stuff out so that we don't hit you guys with 50 new items that came over the Christmas vacation. But why don't you kick us off, man? Or you listening? Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to hijack the show.
Oh, yeah, no, that was great. Yeah, like I said, this is the first. That was our first real Patreon show since the holiday break.
Yeah,
so
yeah, it's been a while.
A couple good things. Yeah, I've just got a handful of things. Two of them people have seen, but you and I met up over the break, and so I was able to collect some of the things you had showed previously. But I wanted to show them off again for those that may not have seen it. But this is the Boba Fett, technically from the Star Wars Droids cartoon, but very reminiscent of the holiday special, of course, coloring and all of that.
Hello, friend.
Hello, friend. So that's really awesome. And of course, one of my favorites actually, that was the High Republic, or I'm sorry, the Old Republic rather, art of book, which is absolutely fantastic.
That I just happen to have an extra copy of.
It's perfect. It was beautiful. It's the way things should work. So I've got two more things, but I'll let you get at least one in there if you want. Well,
I got my LED lighting in. I don't know if anybody caught that last couple shows. I've had it up and running.
It looks sharp, man.
It does. I was trying to go with the whole like light side, dark side, sequel trilogy posters, those two pieces coming together. I got to tweak some of the lighting still. It's just not where I want it, but it's doable. So it's been a long process. And then this is what Jonesy got me. If anybody had not seen, well, you hadn't seen because we hadn't even talked about it yet, but this was as a part of our.
Yeah, unlike you, I keep your gifts a surprise.
Yes, no, I like to air my dirty laundry here right on the air for everyone to see. But as some as you may know, this is my favorite design for the Imperial Forces. The AT-AT driver was always, or AT-AT driver, or whatever generation you're from. Although I do like the Shore Trooper, which, spoiler alert, one of the things I will be showing is another version of the Shore Trooper. I got one.
Nice.
Over the Christmas vacation. So yeah.
Very cool.
Then I picked these up personally just for myself. I didn't realize they had done these. So I really like black lights. And they did this whole series of these things, those pop figures. Again, I don't collect pop figures.
Just like you don't collect pins. Yeah.
Yeah, like pins. I'm not a pin collector, but I have a billion pins and a billion pops, but I do not collect them. I want to make that very clear. I don't collect these. But this is a black light version of it. And it's actually from the comic books, the old Marvel, circa 77, 80s comic run. So, and I have a black light that I can replace my big floodlights here that I use for showing or for streaming. I want to replace those. I can replace them with these. I bought these really massive black lights, but it totally trips out the room.
Yeah.
Maybe one day I'll do a show like that. My teeth look weird, and it's a lot of fun. Okay, so I bought that one. I do want to see what that looks like, and I've not had a chance to put this in the black light. And then the other one I got was this
George
Obi-Wan
Lucas.
Kenobi.
Oh, well, that looks more like George Lucas than it does Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Isn't it really?
I'm sorry, Ben Kenobi.
Yeah.
I think so, except more of a scowl than usual.
But that's in.
Keep swinging that
Kenobi
lightsaber,
fights
Ben.
alone.
Yeah, from issue 2.
Yeah. So it'd be cool. Like the light, it looks like once they get these things under a black light, those will be popping, if you know what I mean.
Nice. All right. So right before I had to go visit my brother today, and I picked up a couple of things from him. And so one is this comic. These are comics. Is a Knights of the Old Republic. There you go.
Oh, that's cool. Look at that. Mandalorian. Mando himself. Din Djarin is on the cover. That's amazing.
It is not Din Djarin, but it was highly speculated that this comic got really popular and quite expensive, although clearly it's come way down when Mandalorian came out a lot of speculation that this character would show up or would be the character. That did not pan out.
No, but he looks very similar to.
Oh, it does. I mean,
gosh.
Yeah, the reddish brown of the armor and stuff like that. And then I'm going to be an Albert, and I picked up this for you.
Oh, you did spoil this for me ahead of time, so
I did, but now I've actually got it in hand. And for those listening, this is the Battle of the Planet. So it's not Star Wars related, but it is a foil cover of issue 1 of Battle of the Planets. And Albert is of course, a child of everything pop culture. And Battle of the Planets was actually one of the basement episodes I was on. We talked about Battle of the Planets, and he's collected some of these comics, and rumor has it he doesn't have that one. But it's
again, I'm not a pop collector, but here's my Battle of the Planets, one of the pop figures that Jonesy bought me. So
that's right.
Keeping with the trend. Yeah.
Yeah, I forgot about that. I did get you that one. This is becoming a theme now.
Well,
you're like the only person that can really truly appreciate. I've got a couple of people who know what it is, but you like truly appreciate it though and enjoy it. So it's kind of cool to be able to do it. But this one's in really great shape though. It's a great looking book. I'm excited to be able to get it to you.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you doing that. Looking out for me. Always looking out for me.
Always.
So yeah, lots of fun stuff. Hopefully you guys had Patreon members have accumulated a massive amount of Star Wars paraphernalia as well. Yeah,
I hope everyone's holiday was great and you had some time to relax, recover a little bit from a crazy year, crazy Star Wars year in particular, as we talked about on the last show. I was actually in the car catching up on some shows. And I was listening through some of ours for just kind of quality checks and stuff, and listening to One Hell of a Fanfic and some other ones. So it was kind of cool going around running errands this evening.
Nice.
I don't get to do that very often. So
yeah. Well, with that, I mean, I guess we'll talk about our main topic. Well, before we do that, we don't really have any news.
No, we did. We are welcoming back Norwegian Space Wolf has rejoined Patreon at the Green Milk tier. So we did see that today. Thank you very much for rejoining the group. And then, of course, don't call it a comeback. Come back. But yeah, and then, of course, a huge thank you to our now part of the tribe members, Mike, Rob, Lauren, Dante, Risk, Justin, Jackson, Sharkman, Dan, Daz, and Isabella. And then, of course, the Delusions of Grandeur folks, Rod, Kathy, and Hard Counter. Again, thank you guys, everyone, so much for contributing to the show and sticking with us. And we hope you are enjoying all the content. If you are listening, we do broadcast the Patreon shows live on YouTube. So everybody can go and get those, cantinacast.com/YouTube.
Yep. No, thank you guys. Thanks everybody for doing that. And here's to 2023, where this year we will hit episode 500. So that's going to be weird. And I think we were talking about, if you didn't catch the main show.
Yeah, so I actually went and looked it up because I was like, this doesn't sound right. Yeah,
update.
Right. Yeah, so 500 is not on May the 4th. But what it looks like is May the 4th would land on a scheduled day. It's a Thursday.
Okay.
So we would be presumably having a show, and it would probably line up with our Mando season recap, because I believe that's the week after Mandalorian wraps up.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, slight update there. Not as fancy. So I guess we could just miss a couple of shows and we'd get there, I guess. But let's not do that.
We might, and I think we may plan something. If not for the general release, then maybe for Patreon we do something special at 500. I don't know what the significance of 500 is, other than it's like, my gosh, how long can you keep doing this? I know Mike keeps asking us that question just about every week, but but beyond that, I mean, it's I think there's some other shows out there that have hit the 500 mark. Not a lot, not many Star Wars shows. I can tell you that have hit 500 episodes, and again, that's numbered episodes. I don't know if we've ever gone back and done the math just to see how many total we've done, all together, all in.
A lot.
It's been a lot.
Yeah. But I'm excited about tonight because this is a continuation of really a couple of different episodes that we've had. Like last night we had talked a lot about, as we were talking about the first and second episodes of Bad Batch, the conversation of Dooku got actually fairly in depth and pretty, pretty involved. And that was really exciting. And after the show, so what people may not realize is after the show, Albert and myself, and when Lauren's around too, we'll get on and we'll all, chat after the show, and we'll just, shoot the breeze sometimes, kind of catch up personally, but also figure out what kind of comes next if it's not clear, or the Patreon shows if we need to adjust, and what that's looking like. So, we were racking our brains last night. Okay, what can we do? What can we do that's different? Because we didn't really feel like there was anything in Bad Batch specifically to really dive into like we did last season.
Yeah.
That we didn't already cover. And so it just, everything kind of kept coming back to Dooku, back to Dooku, back to Dooku. And we did the Tales of the Jedi episodes recently, but there's always something, right? There's always something. So we came up with this idea of, well, what if, was it even possible that Qui-Gon could have saved Dooku from all the things that we've seen? And we know so much about Dooku, and we've learned a lot more about Qui-Gon. Was this even possible? Because we hear all the things about, Qui-Gon would have gone, Qui-Gon was susceptible to go to the dark side. He would have left the Order. It lines so well up with Dooku. They could have been so on and so forth. But we wanted to spin that a little bit differently and see if Qui-Gon really could have made a difference for Dooku in the path that he chose and the path he was going down.
Yeah, and on top of all that, I mean, we had, it's funny because we had already, in hindsight, just to pull back the curtain a little bit more, we were thinking, man, you know what? If we were smart about this, we probably could have pulled out the Dooku stuff and have spoken about it. But, we're thinking, okay, we already talked about Dooku tonight. We just had it on Tales of the Jedi. But yet there's still more there. And introducing this aspect of Qui-Gon Jinn and just whether or not he could have made a difference in it, I think is a very interesting topic. There's a lot of people that have done related shows, not us, but other shows that are out there that kind of do what we do, have usually go down the path of what if Qui-Gon Jinn had survived, and it's more focused on Anakin, right? Anakin centric, right, in terms of like, okay, so what would that have looked like? And if we get, time permits, I think I kind of threw that in there because I think it's worth exploring. But no one that I know of has really kind of taken this angle of like, was Dooku ever savable? And, if he could have been brought to the light, which I think is honestly a huge task, right, almost an insurmountable task. But if there was any one person that probably could have done it, somebody like Qui-Gon Jinn certainly would have. So what I thought we could do is, we'll talk about the Dooku's background again. We don't need to do a full blown kind of rehash of everything that we know, but just kind of how did we get to the point where he turned against his own people on Sereno, as we saw in the most recent episode of the Bad Batch, and then ultimately turning to the dark side. Then I kind of want to lay down some assumptions for this what if episode, for lack of a better term, but some assumptions that I think we could make and kind of base the discussion around, and then we'll get into like, okay, so let's pull back. What would have really gone on here? Like how big of a task would this have been? We'll get into a lot of, I think, Qui-Gon Jinn's philosophies as well. Some really great stuff as part of doing research. I mean, I think we take a lot of what he says and does for granted. I don't think we talk about it quite enough. And I say we, Star Wars community. I'm sure there's people out there, but he was such a living character. Like, I mean, he was the embodiment of the Force. I mean, outside of Anakin, I don't mean physically, right? But, somebody that really represented what the true meaning of the living Force was. I mean, this was Qui-Gon Jinn. And I think that was really what Dooku would have needed. I think and we'll get into that too here in just a second. So, and then at the very, very end, I've got some kind of just for fun questions that kind of make you think, since we're going down this path of altering the timeline, what else would have changed, if anything? So, all right. So could Qui-Gon Jinn have saved him?
No.
I say no to. Well, thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone. That was a great.
We'll see you guys next week.
Well thought out. Lots of preparation went into that thought.
No, okay, no, seriously. Let's start with the Dooku's background first, and we'll get to that question at the very end.
Yeah, sure.
So let's talk about his background. So, how did he become disenfranchised with the Jedi Order? Right? We know, and we saw this in Tales of the Jedi. We saw it in Master and Apprentice. If you've read that book, there is some discussion as well.
Lost.
Yeah, Dooku Jedi Lost. And we'll get into Qui-Gon's kind of parallel thinking here. Because, I mean, I want to kind of lay this out to you just at the beginning. It's the reason why I personally feel like if there was anybody that could change him or kind of bring him back over or whatever, it would have to be Qui-Gon Jinn. Because as separate, as distinct and different as those two characters are, we have to remember they were master and apprentice, and they think a lot alike. On so many levels, they think very similarly. Dooku just had other things that were present that sent him down just a slightly different path eventually. Then with the dark side, all kind of hell broke loose, right? It really changed him at that point. Right. But they're not that far apart.
Well, at least at one point they weren't.
Yes. No,
I
you're
think
right.
by the end of Qui-Gon's life, I think there was quite a stark difference by that point, though.
Yes. He was I would say Dooku at that point was really gone. I mean, he was no longer. I mean, it was more than just being disenfranchised with the Jedi Order, right? He had a disdain for the Jedi Order. We saw this in the Tales of the Jedi, especially when he was fully turned to the dark side and was kind of representing everything that would take to kind of take down the Jedi Order, starting with that whole battle with Yaddle.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, his disenfranchisement with the Jedi Order really stems from the fact that the Jedi were losing touch. And it's still not to bring the High Republic back into this, but I hope we do get to see that. I do want to see where this kind of really started, because I think in that time of the High Republic, not to wax that in here, but I don't know that we're really seeing that. Everything still seems kind of glory days, right?
Right. There
is an allegiance to the Republic. They are doing that, but it's not. It doesn't seem as twisted, or it doesn't seem as I don't know if I want to call it tainted. They do truly feel like guardians of the galaxy. They're not out there to win a war. They're just there to protect them. I think that's a fair statement, at least in phase 1 of the High Republic, right? We'll see what phase 3 looks like down the road.
Right. Yeah.
But it's that separation, right? That's what really started getting under his skin, that they were starting to veer away from the true calling of the Force, the living Force, their role as protectors, defenders of the galaxy, and more the armsmen or the combatants or the soldiers or the army or the warriors, right? The warriors of the galaxy, and specifically those of a Senate that was starting to become corrupt, a Senate that was starting to become lackadaisical, taking advantage of their people. And then, of course, when Palpatine came in, it just got worse from there.
Yeah, what's really interesting about the political atmosphere of all of this is that, one, Dooku's birthright was politics, effectively, right? And then, but also, he's very disenfranchised because of the perceived lapdog. The Jedi are the lapdog of the Senate, right? Not even just the Republic, but of the Senate. But the irony is that he's going to go and, start an apprenticeship with the one who's manipulating the Senate and the Republic and the Jedi, and kind of doing all of it in the name of, order and peace and
whatever. And prosperity.
Right. Yeah. Well, everything's peace and order, peace and order, peace and order. Right. We heard it several times, and we've heard it from Anakin's mouth. We heard it from Vader's mouth in the sequel, in the prequel trilogy, rather. And we heard it in Tales of the Jedi. And so that's the premise behind it. But I think what Tales of the Jedi really did show us really well, at least in a more recent format, was that a corrupt Senate really does bother Dooku a lot. And that he sees that the Jedi Council in particular, and even his peers like Mace Windu, have somehow allowed the political arena and the these outside influences in order to dictate what they think is best. And yet, they claim to be above that, but Dooku knows better because he just sees it and no one's listening. Right? It's like, why won't anybody just listen to what's being said? Where Qui-Gon, stumbles over a Sith Lord, no one wants to take it for what it was worth. I mean, they kind of did, but then it cost his life. I mean, Dooku's like, well, I'm out.
Yeah.
Although he's probably out before them, but that's another conversation about where was he actually leaving? Has he already left the Jedi Order by that point? But yeah, I mean, but you see that side of it. But the irony also is the political side of things, where he needs to go and take care of his own people, and he wants to go build them up. And he touches the dark side even in those moments, again, giving in. And I think this is where we see differences between him and Qui-Gon as well. And we'll bring some examples of that showed out rather clearly about the philosophical differences that Qui-Gon and Dooku had, especially as Qui-Gon was an adult and towards the later year or two of his life.
Yeah. So going back to his role, right? I think just to be clear, so he was in a position of, like, his family came from a position of power, and I think that was one of the things that we touched on in the Bad Batch, like just how far he had fallen. To think that not only was he against the Senate for what they were doing to their own people, but in Dooku Jedi Lost, like, he went back to Sereno because it was his brother. I think
his own family.
Right?
He had basically had to turn against too, right?
Yeah, and he turned against his own family for the protection of his home planet of Sereno. And eventually that's how he got into power. Like, after he had overturned his brother, he was kind of put into that position. This is kind of recapping some of the events in Master and Apprentice. he then calls out to, I think he calls Yoda or whatever, says, "Look, man, I'm not coming back." And of course, Yoda's like, "Hey, don't sweat it. We get it. You've got other higher priorities and all that." And what I thought was interesting too. Do you remember he was willing? He told Yoda he was going to hand over his lightsaber,
Right.
and Yoda's like, "No, once kind of like once a Jedi, always a Jedi. Just keep the lightsaber."
A reminder of the values basically that it represents, because you might need to. I mean, foreshadowing a little bit too. You might need to remember some of that at some point as just a reminder of where you come from and where you belong in Yoda's perspective, at least.
Yeah, and in that era, from from that point, we had I don't remember the Rael Averross call, or at some point he does reach out to Rael Averross. Okay, and Rael is one of his first friends. So before he was training Qui-Gon Jinn, he was training someone named Rael Averross, and the way I would summarize him is he's kind of he's a ladies' man, Jedi,
man. Yeah,
super powerful, very very well versed in the Force, as you would expect, being trained by Dooku. Although he happened to just be kind of he was almost kind of like a rogue kind of Jedi. I don't know. That's probably not the best way to describe him, but nonetheless, he was kind of doing his own thing. He wasn't really part of the Jedi Order. He was just kind of off doing his own thing. So, but he did reach out to Rael a little bit later and tells Rael, "Yo, I've got, why am I talking like this?" He said, "I've got, I found there's this newfound power, and I'd love to share it with you." Right. Kind of hint, not really saying, "Oh, I found the dark side." It wasn't that direct, but you could infer that this is what he was talking about, that somehow he had come into a deeper understanding of the Force, and this was going to really change things. And he really wanted Rael Averross, his former student to Padawan, to come on board with him. Now, whether that was a proposition to, become his rule of two, like his right hand person, right, that he would eventually train, that maybe at some point would end up being Ventress or whoever. It's really unclear. But where I was going with that is I don't know. It seemed very sincere when he left the Jedi Order. I know he had some problems with the Order, but really, to me, it felt like the primary focus of him leaving was because he had some other responsibilities and priorities back on his home planet. Is that a fair assessment, or did you feel like it was more about, okay, I hate the Jedi Order, and yeah, I could go back and help my family or the planet and stay here, but I don't really want to, but it's better than being over there. I mean, where do you feel like it was weighted?
It's been a while since I've read or listened to him, but I think I got to be honest, there was a part of me that said he used it as an excuse. So he didn't necessarily have to call the Jedi Order out directly, and so I think he felt a responsibility, especially for his sister, who believed so deeply in him and in what they were capable of doing, and the atrocities that he had seen, and he actually had the ability to have a direct influence on. I think it really was genuine. I think he did want to go help his people and make up, purge the sins of the family, if you will, and turn things around.
Yeah.
And really, but he also never fit in with the Jedi. I mean, they always viewed him as, from privilege. He stuck out. He didn't have a really great, social, circle or anything like that. I mean, he had Sifo Dyas, who was his own interesting kind of character in a lot of ways. So it wasn't exactly like he was leaving home being the Jedi Order and thumbing his nose at them. He just really never felt like he belonged in the first place. So why not go to the place where you actually came from? You can do something where you feel like you are being restricted from what you're able to do. There's so many rules, and we get this in Tales of the Jedi with him and Mace Windu, but these restrictions on what you're able to do, how much freedom you think you have to be able to do it. And now he can go make the decisions. He has the power, he has the influence, he has the money. And so he can actually go do something about it. Whereas that just wasn't going to be the case with the Jedi Order.
Yeah.
But I think he also did feel like there was a piece of him that he was losing. So I think there was genuine loss there for him as well at leaving the Order. And I think the symbolic nature of trying to turn the lightsaber is indicative of some of that as well.
Mm-hmm. We brought up Rael Averross, and the third member of the Cantina cast is in the live chat tonight. Let's see. She's got a deep take here, and she says hot. Okay, so thank you, Lauren, for chiming in on Rael Averross. Appreciate that. We'll have to just break that down at some point.
You could find the Jedi Novel Archive playlist. on the Cantina Cast YouTube channel. Yeah.
I'm just kidding. I know he is a pretty suave ladies' man kind of character. I gotta admit.
He is. I mean, yeah.
Well, and we learned that let's talk. So let's not talk about that because that'll get Lauren all bothered. But let's talk at least about his Dooku, like that whole group, right? They seem to be okay with attachments, right? They were okay with relationships. How about that? Because
right.
I mean, well, Dooku was definitely okay with relationships. I mean, even though he was kind of flying in the face of the Jedi Order with his sister, right? There was numerous times in, well, now it's blurring. I don't know if it was Jedi Lost or versus Master and Apprentice. It was Jedi Lost.
Jedi Lost, yeah.
Yeah. So he was, his sister back on Sereno, he was told multiple times to essentially just stand down. Like, you really can't have that relationship. And then eventually, I mean, the Jedi weren't wrong. It's what pulled him away from the Jedi Order, because he had that. He felt like obligated that I have to go back to Sereno. I've got to protect my sister. Right. And that's what they're all about. They're trying to separate that. They're trying to get away from those attachments so they can just kind of be, in line with the Force and follow the Jedi Order, the Jedi Code.
Make sure you keep sound judgment in the face of having a really difficult decision. Yeah.
Yeah. And emotions can cloud that, right?
Exactly.
That's understandable. But then you got somebody like Avaros, who, he had a woman that he was sleeping with at some point. They implied that Qui-Gon Jinn had done it himself, right? Let's not forget that. So,
right.
Yeah, I mean, this is all kind of, teachings from Papa over there, Papa being Dooku. So they were all pretty much in line with that. And I think that plays an important role. I don't know, maybe in the whether or not Qui-Gon I don't know if he could have leveraged that specifically to save him. But again, it just shows you that they are all kind of cut from that same cloth. And so it's just another, commonality that they have, which would have made that whole kind of conversation or experience a little bit easier for somebody like Qui-Gon versus, Obi-Wan or Yoda.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm ready to equate that just to these Jedi, because I think we've seen, I mean, Jedi are people too, or they're beings, I guess, in general. They have desires. They go through adolescence. They go through puberty. They go through changes, And so that relationships, at least fleeting relationships, and maybe even, I mean, Obi-Wan Kenobi with Satine, right, is another one. And so while they're all kind of, 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon of sorts, it's still, I think, just beings being beings, right? I mean, you have a natural inclination for attachment, and for, maybe not for attachment, but for relationships, right? And for relations. And don't look into that word too much, but I mean, you know what I'm saying? Though, just
for sure.
We want to interact, right? It's a part of who we are. We're social creatures, and so that it would go and you would be confused by some of those feelings or give in to desires is not necessarily uncommon, I think. But point taken, though, I think with Rael Avaros in particular, I think had a very unique perspective on some of that of, no, dude, I can keep doing this and it's fine because it doesn't mean anything ever.
Right.
I'm just kind of getting out of the way so I can stay focused. He just had the right excuse to go with it, I think.
Yeah, he did. He kind of figured it out. He's playing board games or
right.
I don't know, playing within the rules, if you will. So I want to go quickly to the chat. There's, I know Caleb's with us tonight. Thanks for being here, man. We'll get to some of this here a little bit later, but he says, awesome question. The question about could Qui-Gon have saved Dooku? I personally believe if Qui-Gon had survived, he would have joined Dooku, not as a Sith, but as a separatist. I think that's something we'll probably touch on here a little bit, because I think it could kind of go both ways. Well, I don't know if it, well, let me backtrack on that. Not as a Sith. It would probably, if he was going to join forces with them, in my opinion, it would be somewhat like a separatist. I think it could have gone both ways. How about that? I feel Dooku would have actually made an emotional argument against the Republic. Agreed. And Dooku very much believed in the cause of the separatist movement, and he was a respected voice in the Confederacy. I just think Dooku could have swayed Qui-Gon to his side in fighting the Republic.
We'll see how the evening takes us, won't we?
Yeah, no, for sure. Okay, so I think so that's kind of how I guess he got disenfranchised. Now, in terms of how he was persuaded to go that next step, take it to the next level, if you will, and turn to the dark side, that's where things get a little cloudy. Like, we don't really have a lot there. It was a pretty steep turn, right? I don't know if it was just the power and the seduction of the dark side as much as it was, what Palpatine was offering him. I mean, we know the entryway. I mean, I guess we can assume that the entry point for Palpatine was, There's now a new member of the Lost 20, right? We have this person who, he's got his pulse on what's going on. So he had to have known that he was disenfranchised with the Jedi Order. I think anybody that was close to the Jedi probably knew at that time that there was somebody like Qui-Gon Dooku, who was not happy with how things are going. At the same time, he's stirring the pot, right? He's doing a lot of this to kind of put chaos into the mix to create that dark side cloud, because he would flourish, the dark side could flourish. And so, he was an opportunist in that regard, right? I think he immediately sought him out, kind of catered to his own personal feelings and emotions about what it meant to be, this new a member of the Jedi Order in this current state versus how it used to be, right? Kind of leveraging that and really tapping into those emotions, those feelings, and that was probably all it took, right? Because we know the dark side is very seductive, and it was just a matter of, we see it with Anakin, right, in terms of how Palpatine was able to seduce him. But I would assume it was some sort of angle on that where he kind of got in, and from there, it's probably a snowball effect, because he turned pretty quickly. It wasn't just like, well, let's say, I wouldn't say he turned quickly. I don't know the time span here, but he did a number of things as a follower of the dark side, even if he hadn't become a true Darth, right? He was still doing things like, he went to the Jedi Order, got rid of the information on Camino. We had the Clone Wars episode. Well, that was kind of a little bit later at that point, where he ended up getting Sifo Dyas, who Sifo Dyas was like one of his best friends, like his childhood buddy that he got killed, right? He just did a lot of egregious things that you would not have expected him to do. Sure, he was upset, but this is all kind of dark side stuff on top of everything that we saw in the latest episode of The Bad Batch.
Exactly. And it's one of the things that Sidious is best at is at putting people and groups and organizations in positions that serve his purpose or his cause.
Right.
And even when they don't work out, he's still very manipulative and very good at somehow spinning that into an opportunity. We saw this in Phantom Menace. We've seen it throughout Clone Wars. We've seen it in a variety of ways. And I think with Dooku is one of those opportunities where Dooku could see what the council was doing, because he was, on the perimeter of it. He was basically on the cusp of being invited and giving a seat, right? And one of his best friends with Mace Windu got that seat. So, he clearly saw some of these things. And so what the thing that's always interesting to try to determine is how many of these situations did Sidious actually have his fingers in as a target to Dooku, knowing that Dooku was already susceptible, because Dooku was already showing signs of dissatisfaction, being a bit disgruntled, losing faith and trust in what the Jedi could. Some of his activities, like we saw in Tales of the Jedi, where he's choking the senator. You don't choke a senator. I don't know if that's not in the user manual, but you don't choke senators. As a Jedi.
Right. Or anyone, but yeah.
Anyone.
Well taken.
Right. But I could think of a lot worse people I would go choke that was not a senator. I'm not I was a pretty bad senator, but
yeah,
you just can't do those things. Those things make their way back to Palpatine, because he's always got his ear to the ground, and he's looking for that, especially now that Maul is gone, or at least at that point when Maul is gone. Dooku is the primary target. Very powerful, very skilled, very intelligent, a lot of influence, a lot of money.
Right.
So a lot of things, so that his interest in Dooku for a long time seems very clear that he would have been a clear target, given just how his behaviors were within his, how he grew up in the temple. And that's all. If you want to learn more about it, Dooku Jedi Lost has a lot of that great stuff in there too. So, go listen to that. But actually, we have our breakdown of that book on YouTube. Everybody,
there you go.
People think it's actually the book. It is not the book. We're sorry to say. We hear a lot about that, but yeah,
it's so funny. It's Patreon, so I'll just quickly share it. Like, we laugh at this. We posted that Dooku breakdown, and I thought, what did we call it? We called it Dooku Jedi Lost, didn't we?
Yeah, we just called it Dooku Jedi Lost, and we have a description that says what it is. But back then, our title cards, we were just doing the podcast, and we just threw them up on YouTube. They were usually, if it was a book, we just put the book cover on there.
Yeah,
we didn't think twice about it. But on YouTube, that means something totally different. People thought they were getting something for free, and then they get mad at us when it's not, even though clearly it says in the description.
Yeah.
Like, this is a breakdown of the book. these two clowns talk Star Wars, so on and so forth.
We get so much hate mail, even to this day. Like people are mad, like this is false advertising. This isn't the book. I'm like, you bonehead. Why would we put a copyrighted? I mean, I'm in trouble with YouTube enough for getting copyright infringements. The last thing I need to do is post a damn audiobook.
Right. Yeah.
So
everything's a TLDR these days.
Yeah. Okay. So thanks for allowing us to kind of get that off our chest. All right. So getting back to the discussion. All right. So as far as the dark side, not exactly sure when that happened. It felt like it was a very aggressive kind of churn. A number of things happened there, but I think we all pretty much understand like what was the entry point for them to do that. So
I will say this though. So I rewatched, like I was a little bit late getting on because I was rewatching Tales of the Jedi. And the relationship with Palpatine is interesting though, because it seems like it's one of convenience and one not of like a lot of trust. It seems like it's still, maybe it's gone on for a while, but it's not like they're not master and apprentice until that moment with Yaddle, of course, right?
Yes. No, I agree. That's how I took it. Right.
But they're still, man, it still seems like Dooku has only one foot in the door and he feels like he can maybe get out. And he doesn't quite understand what he's already got himself into. Like when you get one foot in the door, I mean, you've already sacrificed everything. Sure. But it was interesting to me that it seemed like there was still a little bit of this arm's length from Palpatine / Sidious for Dooku, that he felt like he didn't, he was doing a lot, hoping that he can make a difference, but maybe he thought it would be a quicker difference and it wouldn't go on to, let's put that would actually, I don't know, start a war and keep a war going for years. I don't know that Dooku ever saw that as a potential outcome at this stage at all.
I would think not. Yeah. Which I think probably makes it more tragic, but you're right. Like it wasn't until, when he said step up or step out, when Yaddle was there.
Right.
And I mean, at that point, there was no turning back. Like, I think he was like, I don't even know that he was in the right state of mind. I don't know that he thought he was going to kill Yaddle. It might have just been in the heat of it all, right? You could make an argument that Palpatine just being there, as seeped in the dark side as he is, was enough to kind of help even spur some of those emotions on, right? We don't know what that guy was doing in the background there. He's got all kinds of tricks. And
well, when she brought up Qui-Gon, I was like, nope.
Mm-hmm.
No, that was not the right move.
Yeah, she did kind of miss up there. So, but yeah, you're right. I don't. That moment of Darth Tyrannus started right after that,
right?
Fully. But so okay, so let's talk about the assumptions. And I struggled with these because there's a lot of different. Like once you allow Qui-Gon Jinn to live, there are a lot of things that get called to question. Right. And so I kind of try to keep it simple. And then later on, we can play with the other what if scenarios at the bottom. But I said Darth Maul was killed on Naboo. And I've seen people talk about what if, Darth Maul would have left. Right. If Qui-Gon and let's assume that Qui-Gon Jinn was fighting Darth Maul and Obi-Wan Kenobi was able to make it there before the ray shields went up. OK. He could have felt outnumbered at that point, and left to go fight another day. I don't think that's from Maul's MO. I think he was bloodlust. Like he was there to kill the Jedi, and that was it. That was the mission accomplished for him. So I didn't go down that path, but I am assuming that he was killed. Now, whether that was Qui-Gon Jinn killing him one-on-one, something changed there in terms of his approach or whatever, or the fact that it was truly a 2-on-1 there in that final scene, and they killed him and just kicked his dead body over into the little hole there or whatever. But that's the first assumption. The second one is that Qui-Gon Jinn would then take on Anakin as a Padawan. Now, I want to get into that a little bit later because that does not. They did not allow him to take Anakin on as a Padawan the first time. So I think it's a big assumption, and we can break into that a little bit. But for the sake of discussion, he is right. He believes that he's the chosen one. He told Obi-Wan Kenobi that was his last dying wish, which we know was the whole reason they even allowed it to begin with, was because he had stopped the dark side and, it was his last dying wish. So that's the second one. And then the third one is that Anakin is still the chosen one, right? Nothing changes there. And we can talk about what that infers a little bit later. But those are kind of the three assumptions. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that. Feel free to do so.
Well, the one I wanted to add, but the more I thought about it, I was like, maybe we shouldn't because it's probably more of the discussion, is I still believe that Dooku leaves the Jedi Order. I mean, it just seems like with the stuff that would happen with Sereno, if we still consider that canon, And I don't,
Yeah.
I don't know if we can consider Dooku Jedi Last canon, but we still kind of do because it's our best reference point for a lot of that. But it really still feels like Dooku still leaves the Order in some way, maybe under different circumstances. Clearly not with Qui-Gon dying, but something was already afoot, even with Qui-Gon being alive. So him leaving the Order and already linking up with Sidious are already givens as well, because they've already happened.
Right.
Right.
No, so you're not wrong. No, I and that's my apologies. Like, I figured that was just kind of inferred, like it was. But I'm with you. So Dooku
Well, I think it's important to just to reiterate. I think
Yes.
just because with the, like you said, with the what if nature of Qui-Gon, people see, some people I've heard, and I've had this conversation with others, like, well, no, Dooku would have just stayed, or he would have taken him with them, but he would have stayed longer. I'm like, well, he already had one foot out the door.
Yeah.
Like no one no one knew it yet.
Right.
So I think some of that's just, I think it also helps clear that Dooku still is going to the dark side, at least on the path, right? That part is still defined and cleared. But yeah, just kind of making sure it was spoken, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, so Dooku leaving the Jedi Order, here's how I frame this. Dooku leaving the Order and Dooku going to the dark side are not mutually exclusive, right?
Right.
And for the sake of discussion, I mean, what do we say? Could he have saved him? We're speaking very explicitly about saving him from the dark side. I think you're right. Like, I think we know, like, Qui-Gon Jinn was not going to save him from leaving the Order. That's very clear, right? Though he had some own, for all the reasons we've already discussed. I'm not going to rehash all that, right? So I'm with you. I think this is really truly about him going to the dark side is more than leaving the Jedi Order. I would, in all of our discussion points here, this is under the assumption that he did leave the Jedi Order, because I think that was just going so much against his own personal beliefs and how he viewed the Force. Same thing with Qui-Gon Jinn. And we'll get into that here a little bit too, because you mentioned the comic book,
Right.
and there was actually some pretty good stuff in there that kind of reinforces some of the viewpoints, not only of Qui-Gon Jinn, but some of the things that we saw from Count Dooku as well. So kind of passed down.
Right.
And here's Lauren coming in with some good hot takes here. I still believe Qui-Gon could have saved him. Okay, we'll get to that here in a little bit, Lauren. We may have to have our own episode with just Lauren so that she can, like, give us her.
She believes in the good of everyone. Everyone is savable.
Yeah, that's why we have her.
She's very pure of heart. Yes.
Yeah. Although I used to be that. Now I'm more. I mean, now I got an Empire hat. So what does that tell you?
I know you're all sorts of confused these
I'm
days.
all sorts of confused. I'm like Dooku. I'm like 1 foot out. So
Yeah,
you have to bring me back over.
I will say though, I think Dooku, like on the path to the dark side, he's already on it. So, but yeah, it's more about, can he be brought back from it before he truly becomes, Lord Tyrannus.
Yeah. Okay, so let's kind of shift the focus now over to Qui-Gon so that we can kind of figure out, what was it about Qui-Gon that we feel like could have helped him? And the first thing is just how in line, right? What are some of the examples that we saw where Dooku and Qui-Gon Jinn's views on the purpose of the Jedi or the living Force or whatever it is were, I guess, in alignment there?
Yeah, I think the main one is that Qui-Gon Tales of the Jedi had just kind of put it really clearly, right? Whenever he goes into the barn to save and pulls the Senator's son out, saving both the Senator and Dooku's life right away, and potentially more, because you don't know how off the hinge Dooku would have got. But I think it was that belief in people that they will make the right decision, and in acting in the moment, that living Force aspect of things for Qui-Gon, like, was just grounding for Dooku, I think.
Right.
Dooku was very impulsive. Dooku would make a lot of rash decisions sometimes, even though super intelligent and calculated. But he would get emotional and he would respond and react. Whereas Qui-Gon was just very centered and very grounded. He had the concept of the balance of the Force was really important. And I think Dooku recognized that, and I think he leaned on that.
Yeah.
He needed that. I mean, it was a really good counterpoint. When you talk about master and apprentice, it's not always that you become the same one, or you do all the same things, or you have the same movements, or whatever it might be. Is that you have this really, you learn how to work with someone and you complement someone really well. And I think that complementary ways of working is really what would have been a huge contributing factor, I think, for Dooku to stay grounded and stay, at least try to find some amount of center, especially as Qui-Gon got older. As a boy or as a teenager or whatever we saw in Tales, little bit different there, but still willing to listen. And we know they'd had a tumultuous relationship at times as well when they were student and master. But I think just that basic grounding and clearly that respect, even later in life, was still there. That Dooku would have had that voice of reason to listen to. He would have at least listened, I think.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. Like I said, and this is why this is so important that if there was any one person, it's probably him. To go to the comic book, one of the things that stood out to me was there was a moment there where, and this is the what was it, Age of
Republic, 2018, yeah.
And there's a moment there where Qui-Gon Jinn is sitting with Yoda,
right?
And they're kind of contemplating, and Yoda knows there's something bothering Qui-Gon Jinn, and eventually he says, "I feel there's a loss of vision in speaking about the Jedi Order."
Very similar to Dooku's conversation with Yaddle in some ways.
Yes, yeah, and so and like you said, it's not because granted, there's probably some aspect of it where he was trained under Dooku. And, they think very similar in that way, right? I get some of that. But Qui-Gon was, at this point, his own person. And he was following the Force. He was following the living Force. In that comic book, and we talked about this when we broke that comic down. What does he do to go kind of figure out, clear his head or figure out his feelings? He jumps into a ship and then just allows the living Force to just take him wherever it may take him, and he trusts in the living Force in so much that he just allows that to happen. It
was like a Force walkabout.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's that kind of gives you the mindset. Now that's not what Dooku would do. Dooku's really not kind of like that. But at the same time, so where I'm going with this is that even though they had very different aspects or viewpoints of the Force and how the Force works and how it controls them or doesn't control them in their later years, in their adult lives, both of them were able to acknowledge that there was a lack of vision, right? There was a moment in that comic book also where he was telling Yoda that he didn't like being called a warrior.
Right.
Like that really bothered him. And it didn't really seem to bother Yoda that much, honestly. And so yeah, from that perspective, you get the sense that they were, two people that truly felt like the Jedi Order had lost their ways. They weren't living up to the Jedi code anymore. They had become, in some ways, these lapdogs of the senators and all that. So, from that regard, I think those two viewpoints are similar. We talked about the relationship piece as well. I still think that. Well, no, I'm not going to get into that. I was going to get into this whole Shmi and Qui-Gon Jinn thing, but that's just me shipping them, so we won't get into that.
Yeah, that's best left tabled. Yeah.
Lauren, we'll do that one later.
Yeah, you and Lauren can do that one. I will step out.
The Shmi.
Yeah, you'll have fun with that one.
Yeah, that's the Qui-Gon Jinn ship.
That's the Uber Patreon special, right?
Let me take that note.
That no one's a tier of. I agree with you though. I think even the perception of the council is an extension of that. That is a similarity between Dooku and Qui-Gon Jinn, where they're talking with their superiors, or they're talking with the council, which is what you're supposed to do. When something's troubling you, you go to your senior and you talk to them and you have that. But I think a key difference, though, a little bit of a difference, is that Qui-Gon was willing to be a bit more vulnerable and listen to whatever the response is. He hadn't shut down quite yet. And maybe that's his, he's still much younger than Dooku, of course, but
sure.
So I think some of that is also just those years of experience. But both of them see the Jedi Order and they're concerned about it. They're concerned about the council. And they're concerned that these bodies that are supposed to represent them and be that sound judgment are cutting corners. They've lost they have a lack of vision, to quote, the Emperor Palpatine at that point later on. Mm-hmm. So what do you do with that whenever you're faced with that? I guess, man, that difficult decision where you lose faith in who you are supposed to be following.
Yeah.
And what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to turn to the Force. I think this is where Yoda gives decent counsel, I think, in the comic as well. He's like, we always turn to the Force, and we turn to the living Force, for that inspiration, for that sight, for that insight and wisdom. When we have to ask the questions. I think one of them, we'll talk a little bit more about differences, I guess, here in a little bit. But yeah, we have to ask the questions. It was a really important one. I think both Dooku and Qui-Gon have always been really good at that. They've always been very curious and very open-minded in a lot of different ways.
So this next question that I have, I don't know that it's a really fair question, to be honest. I really went back and forth on. I mean, it needs to be asked. I just don't know the right answer to it. Because in some way, if we've made the argument that he was not happy with the Jedi Order, and if Qui-Gon was to save him, for me, it feels like it would have to have started with Qui-Gon trying to get to him and saying that, look, the Jedi Order is salvageable, right? There's still something there that we can redeem, reclaim. It's not completely lost. It's not completely gone, right? And so is that Qui-Gon trying to convince them that they approach the Jedi Order together and change the Jedi Order's ways? Is it going into the Senate and changing something at the Senate level so that they're not influencing the Jedi Order in the way that they are? Or is it some combination thereof, right? And again, this is assuming that he doesn't just say, I'm done with the Jedi Order too, right? And I'm coming to join you as a separatist person, kind of like what Caleb was talking about here in the chat, which is kind of one of our hypotheticals down at the bottom.
Yeah, Qui-Gon wouldn't have been a separatist either, but we'll talk about that later. I think this is a bit of a difference between them. I think Dooku is like, F it, I'm out kind of thing, right? His patience is worn thin. He's done. I think Qui-Gon would keep trying though. And he would stick with it to keep trying because he's not. And I think both him and Dooku have been like this in the past where they will present a challenging case and they will challenge and they will speak up for what they believe, even if it's in defiance or perceived defiance of the council. And so I think Qui-Gon probably would have banged his head against that wall a few more times. But I think at the end of the day, they both knew that they could not change the Jedi Council's mind. Like the Order's mind was made up. It was this just unstoppable force of the direction it was going. There was just way too much momentum for it to go anywhere else. And of course, the other thing is always, of course, Palpatine is dragging them into the Republic, almost literally, without them realizing it,
right,
and integrating them. And of course, the things that we get later on with the acts and the Senate and all of that. But so I think Qui-Gon would have kept trying. But I think at some point, they both fundamentally knew this is a lost cause. But maybe I can still do something about it. But I think they both would have lost faith at some point. I mean, they already have lost faith, but I think they would have both at some point still said, no, this is just not working out.
Yeah. Well, and it's an uphill battle. It's like a really uphill battle because not only, like I agree, like I don't know how much they could have influenced the Jedi Council to change to kind of hear them out first off, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you think about Luke Skywalker and him talking about kind of the arrogance of the Jedi Order. They weren't going to hear all that. I mean, and not only that, so that on top of the fact that you got, the council, and we kind of got this was kind of implied from Master and Apprentice in some ways that both Dooku and Qui-Gon Jinn were kind of like way into the Force prophecies.
Yeah, that was not popular.
Not a popular opinion at all.
Yeah, people were threatened by it. I mean, they thought it was borderline. What's the word? Blasphemy, heresy? Almost. Yeah,
blasphemy. Yeah. So then not only that, but it was kind of like, oh, here comes Dooku and his quack Padawan with another theory, right? Much like people think about our show. But on top of that, now you got him doubling down and going, this kid's the chosen one. Right. And so you got like the two head people of the Jedi Order, Mace Windu, Yoda. I don't think either one of them truly believed that he was the chosen one. We know Mace didn't, right?
Right.
Yoda.
I don't know if we ever really got clarity around Yoda's perspective on it.
I think he was kind of like, what's the harm? I mean, well, what is the harm? Nothing happened, right? He was fine. Yeah. Again, more sound judgment from Yoda.
Well, I think one thing to add to that, so I can hear some people maybe saying, well, now Yaddle left the Order, right? So Yaddle, the thing is, Yaddle left because Qui-Gon died.
Right.
It sounds like.
Right. It is.
So Qui-Gon lived. Does she actually leave the Order to where they do have an advocate, or does she still have, or has she been able to, let go and see some of that for what the Order was, or was it just the realization that, the Sith Lord was real, and that's when she lost faith in the Council, or was it really just the death of Qui-Gon that made her? It kind of tipped her over the edge of making that call, and I have a feeling that may have been more it than anything else.
I do too.
And so I don't know that that's
late.
yeah, it's a little late on that one. But I think also she's not necessarily an advocate, although I think she really does care about the people around her and about Dooku. It's not clear if that would have mattered because I think we have to call into doubt whether she would have still left the council or not. She didn't leave the order. She just left the council.
Right. Yeah, she didn't leave the order. Just she stepped down, resigned her seat.
He permanently left her took her from the order.
He took her out. Yeah. So and so where I was going with this in my notes is I had allies. Like if they were going to approach the council and try to kind of make them change their ways or see the error of their ways or make them realize that they had lost their focus and attention, the vision, they don't have a lot of allies really on that Jedi Council. I mean, eventually he would, again in a different timeline, he had Obi-Wan Kenobi, but Obi-Wan was still, he was kind of a company man. He was
still young too this time.
Yeah, right. And he would
hadn't even passed his trials yet.
Yeah, he hadn't even passed trials. That's true. So, but beyond that, at least from canon, we don't have any kind of good intelligence around who else would have been. I mean, Yaddle was a surprise, honestly, like when that kind of blew our minds, like, whoa, there's somebody else that kind of sees this and sympathizes and for maybe not fully for all the same reasons, but definitely was starting to kind of see that as well. So
yeah, and we think Yoda may have been getting there later on, but that was probably several years away.
Yeah.
That before that really started to sink in a little bit. So Yoda is a bit of a bit of a curmudgeon here and a stalwart of, our own counsel will we keep, right? I mean, that arrogance that comes through or ego or whatever, even if it's not that, it was just putting someone in their place. Like, you listen here, you little one.
Yeah.
We've been doing this for blah, blah, blah. But yeah.
The other, so yeah, that would have been really difficult for him to do. So he can't overturn they can't change the Jedi Order. I think it's even I don't know. Could they have done anything at the Senate? Because
no,
the only way they would have been able to impact the Senate is they would have had to have usurped or removed Palpatine.
Well, and it goes back to the Count leaving the Jedi Order and basically going to Sereno and then having Sereno be part of the Republic, which it's not, right?
Right.
So I think that's the only other way you get into the Senate is if you say Count, Sereno now is representing them within the Republic. If I'm wrong on that one, please correct me though.
I think you're right. I don't think they ever
I think
were.
I think they were independent way back when. But I can't remember, yeah.
How would they have done that? They wouldn't even had an avenue to do so.
Yeah,
right?
you don't have a seat. And everyone's like, well, you have a Jedi Council. Why are you coming to me if I'm a senator, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what do you want me to do about it?
Yeah.
I mean, granted. Well, no, because what happens? Dooku goes to Palpatine. Well, we're already at that point. So, I mean, you've already kind of stepped down. Depending on where we're at in the timeline here, I know we're kind of jumping between likely a several year period of discussion here, but still, does that lead back to Palpatine directly? And does that doesn't necessarily drag Qui-Gon, but it drags Dooku into that because again, that he's feeding Dooku's ego and Dooku's line of thinking in that regard.
Right.
So again, it just kind of further pulls them apart and kind of tends the answer towards, well, Qui-Gon would have had a much more difficult time trying to, keep Dooku from that path.
Yeah. So, okay. So I think we're both in agreement here that we don't know that they would have been able to make a difference in either one of them. Right. So,
right.
So in order to save Dooku, then the only other thing that probably could have happened, and well, I shouldn't say there's probably other options, but the more logical, clear path to me is they would both become like an Ahsoka, right? They would conceivably, he would then talk to Dooku. Dooku would say, hey, yeah, we're both in agreement. Qui-Gon's able to get through to him and make sure that, to kind of help stiffen the dark side influence on him. And then, and then they both have somebody like they would then have Anakin Skywalker, right? He would still be his Padawan. So the three of them, conceivably at that point, in my headcanon here, would kind of be doing their own thing. I think following the living force, right? Doing their own kind of 3-man show. Is that enough though? Would that have been enough to dissuade somebody like Palpatine? Would he have changed his MO at that point?
Well, no, nothing's changing Palpatine's. I mean, he's
I meant just pursuing somebody like Dooku. Is he off limits?
Is he off limits? No, I think because the character is still there. The brashness. I mean, even within Anakin, maybe it turns him towards Anakin sooner, but I mean, he already had his eyes on Anakin anyway. I mean, he learned a lot of things about Anakin really, really early on, and he influenced Anakin's birth. Whether we want to accept that as canon or not, it sure seems very not subjective, very suggested in the Charles Soule comic, back in 2015 or whatever it was.
Oh, he did. Stop talking about it. It's fine. People get it.
Okay. Well, I don't know. Some people still are in denial. Well, some people just don't know.
Right.
That, but anyway, so, and now I'm all flustered. Anyway, no, but I don't think that, I don't know, because they wouldn't have been a triumvirate. I think that's the thing. You don't have Jedi rolling around in threes, because if you're still in the order, you're still playing by the order's rules in some way. You're still following their commands. You're still getting missions. You're not going together as a triad, and especially with Obi-Wan in the mix too. Even if he's graduated and become a knight, he still presumably would have done things with Qui-Gon from time to time. But it's the same with like Rael Averross. Rael Averross kind of went his own path too.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I think a lot of those things just steer towards Dooku just leaving. I mean, because if you're upset with things enough, clearly you're just going to step out and not keep up with it. I don't know that Qui-Gon could have I don't think Qui-Gon could have kept him from leaving the order. I think is maybe step one. I think that was pretty much a given. He was gonna leave.
Sure.
And coming back and doing things with the Jedi seems very unlikely to me, unless they had something very specific with Sereno that they had to like be on that planet for a specific reason.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, it's why would their paths cross at that point?
Yeah, this is where things get really kind of hairy for me, because I would agree. Like I don't know that they would still be. I don't think they'd be outside of the Emperor's radar. In fact, I think he would see this as even a more sweeter kind of challenge, right? Because now you've got Count Dooku, who he still feels like he can get on his side. You've got somebody like a second person now, like Qui-Gon Jinn. Although Qui-Gon Jinn was not going to be tainted. There's just nothing that believes that he would ever turn to the dark side, right?
Right.
But he's got Anakin in the mix of all this, right? So he still gets what he wants. He gets Anakin, he gets Dooku, and as a bonus, he probably gets them. I think it's a longer game for him to play, and it probably would change the course of the events that happened, right? For him to get all three of these guys to kind of come over, or at least align with him in some way, or start down the path of the dark side in some way. I mean, I could see a situation where both Dooku and Anakin do leave, because I still think, again, at the end of the day, he's still the chosen one, and I feel like he does in at least in our little fun scenario here, Anakin still churns. Like I don't know that he's gonna be saved. At some point, something happens that turns him to the dark side, so that he can fall and come back again later down the road.
It's the will of the Force.
It's the will of the Force. We got to talk about this more, because this is starting to come up a lot more too, and our viewpoints haven't really changed, but I don't think we've really kind of broken. Not since we did the breakdown on the Force have we got into it, but it's starting to rear its head a lot more here lately.
Almost 5 years ago.
Yeah, it's been a while. But I do feel like some of these things are just inescapable, right? You can't change the destiny of some of these things, because it is the will of the Force. Things may look a little different, and so going back to this whole piece. So I think from that perspective, I think, to be fair to the question about whether or not he could have saved him, I think we've kind of laid out all the reasons why somebody like Qui-Gon Jinn could save him. I don't disagree with that. I don't know, and for me, it kind of lands in two scenarios. He saves him, and together they go down this path that eventually, Anakin Skywalker is converted over and they're not. Or the other scenario is somebody like Qui-Gon or Anakin is converted. Anakin and Dooku are converted still at some point. But I think, again, to go back to the question, yes, I think somebody like Qui-Gon Jinn could have at least prevented, if not slowed down, the rapid progression that Dooku went down with the dark side. But I don't know that it's going to change and alter a lot of the same events that happened down the road.
Yeah, I think a lot of it was, if Dooku leaves, and even if Qui-Gon leaves, I don't think they stay together. And I think this fundamentally goes to if Qui-Gon leaves, he is going to leave to pursue the study and the following of the living Force. That is not Dooku. I mean, effectively, in the High Republic type of mentality, Qui-Gon becomes almost like this way seeker type of
Yeah.
role, right? Not you really kind of operate outside of the Jedi Order, but you're friendly with them, right? But people don't necessarily look at you with kind eyes all the time. And so you have this outsider aspect. So I don't think even if they both leave that they're not, and this is why I don't think Qui-Gon would be a separatist either, because he would follow the Force. He wouldn't follow the agenda of this political arena. If anything, he would be out there trying to help whoever and whenever he could in a variety of ways, but he wouldn't be picking sides because that's not what balance is.
Right.
And at least in his perspective. And we learned this a lot from the comic as well about what this true achievement is, because when you take arms, you're just feeding the dark side, you're feeding the dark side. But the lesson that he came away from that is that light always finds a way. Like the light wants to be there with the dark. And so you have to be able to let it in. And that's the key difference between him and Dooku, is that he's willing to let that light come back in. Dooku has shut that off. And I don't know if that door can be opened. And even when it is, like, so I went back and rewatched the scenes with Obi-Wan Kenobi and Attack of the Clones. I mean, you really do feel like he could really use his counsel. I really need my friend. Mm-hmm. I really miss and I need that guidance from him, because it helped center him. It helped ground him. And it's no longer there because he just can't do it himself.
Yeah.
And I don't think that without Qui-Gon being there consistently. And again, I think Palpatine still gets his hooks into Dooku, because if he's the Count of Sereno, which still, I think, again, still is the path that he goes, all the things still happen. Dooku is still unhappy with the state of the galaxy. He's still pissed off with the Jedi. He's still pissed off with the Republic. So all of these things, and now he's accumulating power and influence, even more than he had before. And there's just no amount of Qui-Gon's a bit too passive to really do much about that. And they're no longer on the same force-driven path, like a path, if you will.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just a fundamental difference by that time. And I think they were already straying far enough from it, even in the material that we've had before Qui-Gon's death. I think it was just inevitable that they wouldn't have been able to stay linked together for very long. And even if they did, it would be very elastic is probably still really generous of a word. It would be very erratic.
So do you think then there's a scenario, because this is how I rationalize it all. At the end of the day, I still feel like, again, yes, he could have saved him. And when I say that implies that there is a constant communication, there a constant contact. If somebody like Dooku, like you said earlier, we know that he was struggling. He was looking for somebody like Qui-Gon's counsel. He knows that, that Qui-Gon did ground him. We saw that very clearly and evidently in the Tales of the Jedi episode, where he acknowledges, had you not been here, things could have been worse,
Yeah.
At some point, I'm in agreement. Like, I feel like the Emperor is still going to reach out to him for all the reasons that we've already talked about, the power and the position and all that. So had he reached out, I think that at least in my head, Dooku would have started to feel that pull to the dark side, much like Anakin, right? And we can argue that Anakin went down that path for the same reasons. Like, he didn't have Qui-Gon Jinn there. And had he had Qui-Gon, again, that's a whole nother discussion that everybody's, dissected 10 ways to November. But
right.
I feel like Dooku at some point would have reached out to somebody like Qui-Gon Jinn and said, I'm being torn apart, to quote Kylo Ren. Right. And I think that would have been enough for him to say, okay, Qui-Gon saying, hey, the living force is calling me. This is the will of the force. I'm being called to help my former master in a way that, this is an opportunity for me. So, whether that becomes a new type of a relationship or they end up pairing together or whatever, but that's how I, in my head, rationalized that they would still have, that contact, because I feel like he would acknowledge that he needs help. And the only person he would have at that point would be somebody like Qui-Gon Jinn.
All right, let me ask you a really uncomfortable question.
Size.
No, stop it.
Oh,
stop it. All right, so that call gets made, because I like where you're going, and I do agree with you in some respects on here. But there's a scenario that comes up that is very dark and very concerning. Qui-Gon answers the call, right? He makes the call for Dooku makes the call for help. Qui-Gon's like, absolutely, hello? Yeah, hello. What do you need? I have a special set of skills, as Derpy reminded us. Yeah. So he invites him out there, and it's genuine intent. it doesn't go. Maybe Dooku's frustration and things like that continue to mount, and it becomes more of a sales pitch to Qui-Gon. Qui-Gon says no. What does Dooku do?
So Qui-Gon says no to, I'm not going to help you?
No, he helps him, but then the help that Dooku really wanted, it wasn't necessarily altruistic, or it was clear that it was going down a different path that Dooku, because this is the thing we have to be careful about Dooku. Dooku, even when he asks for help, it's not always, and again, I like it because I think he would have done this, and I think it would have been genuine, but I don't trust Dooku. I never have when it comes to not serving his own interests and needs. We just have too many examples of it, right? Even when he was with a Jedi and when he was a little more idealistic about being a Jedi, he still served his own interests a lot. And so I have very high degree of confidence that he would have skewed this that says, yes, I need your help, but I need it because I need you to join my cause at the same time. And if he was far enough down the darker path by that point when he did ask for help and Qui-Gon refused to, I don't know if you want to say team up, but
yeah,
if a
I get what you're
Dark Lord,
asking.
Dark Lord would have to put them down, right? Or
so
try.
yeah, no, that's a very good question. And not to give a cop-out answer, but I think it depends on how far down if he makes that call early on.
Yeah, it depends a lot, right?
Yeah, it depends on how far down the path he is at that point, because there is
if it's
a point
after
in no
killing
return.
Yaddle, if it's after killing Yaddle, probably a little different conversation than if
Yes.
it was, a week before.
Correct. So I think again, it's about the severity of where he's at in his head. Like we don't know. I mean, this is again pure theory speculation as far as when he would even acknowledge that something was not right. All right, because he's
Right.
being wooed, he's being seduced, he's loving it from Palpatine. But at some point, he does start to feel that struggle. He starts to feel the pull to the dark side, starting to lose the light. And if he makes that call early on, then I think somebody like Qui-Gon Jinn would intervene. Like there would be an intervention of some sort for him to either pull him away from that, or take it to the Jedi Council and say the dark side is is here, it's around, it's Dooku, it's infecting Dooku, whatever. But you're right. At some point, those you get diminishing returns, and there is a point of no return at all. And you're right. I don't think that would have gone over well. It would have been a very awkward conversation, because I think Dooku would have been like, yeah, let's get you in on this too, because now I need an apprentice and we have the chosen one. So I don't know if I answered your question. I agree I agree with your assessment though, that at some point that would be.
It's a slippery slope question. So it wasn't really a fair kind of scenario, because it can go in a lot of different ways. And there's a lot of, well, maybe, but if this was, there's a lot of uncertainty. I think there's one quote when I kind of think about all this together, especially what you were talking about before I kind of derailed you there. What Qui-Gon says to Padme in episode 1, I can protect you, I can't fight a war for you. And I think existentially that still applies. I think that applies to this situation here too with Dooku.
Mm-hmm.
He could fend it off for a while, but at some point you get tired. At some point you get worn down. At some point, and I'm not saying he get tired or anything, but I mean just just kind of work with me here. But it's that situation though of like where he can't take everything on for you and bring you back to the light single-handedly, kicking and screaming, and it's all good. And I need to throw you in rehab, right? Dark side rehab.
Mm-hmm.
It's not how it works. So he can help him, he can protect him, he can try to run interference and put the blockers and show and help him and respond and be the friend. But he can't do all of the work for him either. And I think that's the thing where Dooku, it's hard for me to get on board that says that Dooku would have put the work in to really stop doing some of the things that were in conflict with maybe some of his Jedi upbringing. And not that saying that all of those are great, but fundamentally the Jedi are trying to be good citizens, right?
Yeah.
Protect the galaxy and all that good stuff. But again, I don't know that Qui-Gon would have enough endurance to continue to do that, nor is that the right thing to do, because then that we call that codependence, right?
Yeah, and that was the scenario where I feel like, okay, so then what happens? Either he doesn't intervene and just sorry, he can't do that. It kind of goes against my moral code, or they suddenly become this new group of Force users that's out, gallivanting across the galaxy to what end? I mean, I guess they become the hippies. They're just out there, following the Force and living their lives. But I mean, that's just not a likely scenario.
I can go far darker on you too. If the will of the Force is for Dooku to turn, and the will of the Force is for Qui-Gon to die and to be part of that, put them together, and Dooku puts Qui-Gon down, and that's his descent into the dark side. Permanently.
Now, I'd consider that too at some point. Again, I think it just goes back to what you said. It's like, where's the meter? Where's the dark side meter when, they come back together? Because it wouldn't be an immediate thing. We're talking potentially years that would pass before Dooku reached out. So where's Qui-Gon at that point? Where is Anakin?
What is the Clone Wars? I mean, how the Clone? I mean, there's so many what ifs. It's really difficult to not go down. Like, this is why time travel is a terrible idea too, right? You change one thing, and goodness knows everything else changes with it, right?
Yeah.
So, but it's that mentality though. Like, what else changes? Let's presume that the Clone Wars still happen, and let's say that Dooku is still responsible because he's already done the Sifo Dyas stuff. What does that do to change Qui-Gon? I mean, and again, you have a whole nother set of influences on Qui-Gon that you've got to take into account about how well he's going to be able to align with Dooku. Again, Qui-Gon is not a separatist. Qui-Gon would be a pacifist before anything else. He would just be neutral. He'd be on Mandalore or something. No, he wouldn't be on Mandalore, but he would be neutral, helping people do something, not picking a side. So how does the war change on all that stuff? And does that create bitterness with Dooku? I mean, there's a lot of different ways you could go down this, but unfortunately, and I'm a bit pessimistic here, and I apologize for people who are hoping for maybe a more positive response, but I just, we've seen enough with Dooku and enough of his life that it makes it difficult to say that he wouldn't keep going back to those same tendencies, because some things are still a given. His sister is still dead. His brother is still corrupted. He still doesn't like the Jedi Council. He's still being tempted in some other ways. Some of those things are still constants, or that experience is still there. Those haven't changed.
Right.
So he is still who he is. But you're right. I think the timing of some of that stuff does change quite a bit. And does it soften the severity of it? I think is an interesting conversation of how far it could go one way or the other. But we try to keep this to an hour and a half, not 6 days.
Okay, well, let's since we're going to try, because we want to keep this under an hour and a half, let's just quickly kind of run through some of these other kind of fun scenarios here, and we don't need to dig into them too deep. But okay, so we've altered the course of the timeline here and said that that Qui-Gon Jinn has lived, and so now the question becomes: how and when would Obi-Wan Kenobi be given the rank of Master? Do you think that there's anything around that, or is it just kind of like a natural thing? Because that was really what accelerated for him. I mean, Qui-Gon said he was ready, right? So there's no reason to believe that he wouldn't still have gotten it. But this was really the catalyst for him to get the rank of Master.
Well, it's a rank of Knight. Right?
Knight, sorry. Yeah, no.
Wait, so do you want to go to rank of Knight or rank of Master?
Well, I know rank of Knight is what I meant. I want to go back to the ending of the Phantom Menace is really what this is about.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think that path was still pretty clear. He was going to recommend Obi-Wan to do the trials anyway here pretty soon. So I don't think that changes a whole lot. I think that's pretty much in place.
Yeah.
Now they may not have been in such a rush, and it wouldn't have, the optics would have been a lot better. But I think overall, Obi-Wan clearly was ready anyway.
Yeah. So is there a scenario in which the Jedi Council would have allowed Qui-Gon Jinn to take Anakin as a Padawan, like legally, if you will?
The question I had was, could they stop him legally? Well, I don't know how that works. We don't really know we don't really know how that works, I guess.
Well, I know.
What if someone says no to the council?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, it's I guess we don't know specifically what the bylaws are, right?
Right.
But if he's going to the council, and you look at his expression when the council's like, no, we're not allowing that. And Qui-Gon's like shocked and surprised, like, what do you mean no? You know what I mean? Like, I always just assumed that they can't do that. Like, that's against the law. You can't just go there. Now, whether or not he, like,
we
in
saw
some
him
of the scenarios we talked about.
I'm sorry to interrupt. We saw him skirt the rules anyway. I'm not allowed to train you, but I want you to watch me really closely. You're going to
yeah,
be
I
with
can
me
see-
all the time. You're going to be with me all the time.
Yeah.
And you're going to watch me, but I'm not training you.
So
Just to be
that's
clear.
exactly what I had as the scenario. Like he still takes him, quote, as a, he's still there. He's
like a
riding
page.
shotgun with him
Yeah.
and he's training him.
Right.
But he's not technically a Padawan, right? He's
Right.
not, he doesn't have a braid or any of that stuff, which I think is something that Qui-Gon would do. Like, because in his mind, again, to follow the living force and the way he did. I mean, there's so many examples here. We didn't really get into a lot of them, right? But he, in Phantom Menace, it says nothing happens by accident.
Right.
You know, finding him was the will of the force. I mean, all the things are lining up for him to be the chosen one, but everything is lining up for him to be his master. Like this is what he believes in. And we know that from the comic and Master and Apprentice. This is all part of those prophecies, right? He's just always believed that this was going to happen. And here it was right in front of his face. So there's no doubt in my mind that he would have trained Anakin Skywalker, whether he held the title of Padawan or whether Qui-Gon had the title of Knight. Probably not, but he's going to train that kid. There's no doubt in my mind.
Right.
So, so how would, oh, sorry. The other one was, let's bring Anakin and Ahsoka into this. Okay. Part of what I feel like, and I could be wrong. I can't remember if they really ever said, I think it was implied over the course of the entire series of the Clone Wars. But part of what they were trying to do by assigning Anakin Ahsoka was somebody to ground him, right? To give him, to kind of fill the gap that he still had even after being, you know, under the tutelage of Obi-Wan Kenobi. Try to round him out. And I think Ahsoka was kind of the perfect person, although we know that didn't really go the way they wanted. But, you know, with Qui-Gon in the mix and having trained him now, Anakin Skywalker, would he be a well-rounded person? Would he be more well-rounded? And where would that leave Ahsoka? Does she fall under somebody like Kenobi? Does she even become a character, you know, that we all love? I think she still does. I just don't know what that scenario is.
Yeah, the training would have been very different because if we remember back, even the first Obi-Wan and Anakin comic book, it talked a lot about this. And what we see this in Master and Apprentice too, is that the challenge of the relationship between Obi-Wan and Anakin actually was very similar to the challenge between Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon. I think the main difference this time around, though, is that it would have been both of them kind of chose one another with Anakin and Qui-Gon. And I think that's the unique piece to it all, is that how does that change matters? You know, do you feel like you have a different connection? But also that's a dangerous thing too, because then when something goes wrong, Anakin is still Anakin, right? He's still defined. He's still hot-headed. Maybe some of those edges get sanded and rounded off a little bit, but at his core, it's still who he is, at least as a young kid, right? So how much progress is Qui-Gon able to make from that? And then having Obi-Wan as an influence, though, as well, I think would be a potentially great thing. So I think Anakin could have been much better off, and you'd have to really put a lot of thought into, okay, what are all the different scenarios? I think Padme is still the primary thing, right? Is coming back to Padme, and that's still Anakin's true descent. It's not necessarily Obi-Wan or Qui-Gon or anything like that. It's that attachment to Padme and knowing what he knows and feeling like he's being held back. Because if you remember, Obi-Wan felt like he was held back by Qui-Gon as well. So, and Qui-Gon was doing that in protection of Obi-Wan. And you need to learn the basics. I want you to know these things backwards and forwards, is what he told him. You know, this is because that will save your life. My job is to make sure you know how to protect yourself. That sound familiar? Right?
Mm-hmm.
With Anakin and Ahsoka.
Right.
You know, and so that's what Qui-Gon was teaching Obi-Wan. So that same frustration and, you know, growth and those development challenges are all still going to be there in some ways. And Anakin is still going to do that. So how does Anakin respond to that, though, is a really interesting scenario that unfortunately, it's really difficult to speculate. You would like to think it would have been better, especially with both. Kind of like Rael as well, right? With Obi-Wan able to talk to Rael about Qui-Gon, you know, and being able to link up that way. I think that was a really great thing. I think that would have been a really amazing opportunity for Anakin and Obi-Wan to have more of a peer relationship than Master and Apprentice relationship. And I think that it would have been it could have set Anakin on a very different trajectory, but there's still a lot of things stacked up against Anakin that still would have precipitated a potential downfall.
Okay, so going down that path of Anakin Skywalker, and this is not in the show notes, I'm going to throw a curveball at you.
I know the show was originally about Dooku, but yeah, we're on the.
Well, but we're in the bonus time here,
Right.
And this is about this is more about Qui-Gon now. Okay, so Qui-Gon trains Anakin, and he takes him as a Padawan or whatever that is, whatever that looks like. Do you think one of the first things that they do is go back and get Shmi and free the slaves?
I think it's on the menu.
I think so too.
Well,
because one, he loves her. Two,
Anakin does, right?
No, like Qui-Gon. This is that whole the section that the ship that Lauren and I are going to break down here soon. Like he's already throwing his hands up. He's getting up. All right, Jonesy has left the show for anybody that's not watching the live stream, and Terry might come now. No, but okay, no. All joking aside, I think going back to that whole point of the relationship piece of it, and acknowledging what does Anakin Skywalker need. I can see a path where Qui-Gon says, we've got to get mom back and maybe temper the relationship. I don't know. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he allows him to just kind of be there.
Yeah, I'm going to put a hard no on all this, by the way.
Okay. But knowing that is a huge amount of duress for him, stress, and that's, I think at some point he starts to see Anakin's anger starting to surface more, all that, like, he needs that. And so for me, I think it's Qui-Gon going to him and rescuing Padme, rescuing Shmi, freeing the slaves, and removing that barrier of Anakin so that he can get more in touch with his light side and all of that. I still agree, though. I mean, I think at some point, the reality of losing Padme is the ultimate reason why he does turn to the dark side. I don't think that changes anything.
I think Qui-Gon would be expelled if he did that. To be honest with you, I think he would probably get thrown out of the order because it is so against, like, you are encouraging attachment at that point, which is you are against the doctrine at this point. So why are you even a Jedi? I mean, you have encouraged the one thing that we are supposed to rise above. And by having his mother there, I can't teach him to not be attached because she's always there now. She lives in the temple. She's
she shows it up all the practices with her lawn chair, and
she's meeting people at the front, making sure that
everybody gets
a hearty. Everybody says a hearty good morning, or whatever it might be. I don't know what her skill sets are, but I mean, yeah, I think that would be.
Well, I think, and that's
so
fine.
bueno.
Like, I think, so what? Like, does he care? I don't know that Qui-Gon cares if he gets kicked out of the Jedi Order, because again, he is so committed to this idea that this is the chosen one. Like, okay, so what? Then this is all part of the will of the Force. If they're going to kick me out, then there's a higher order here. There's something bigger here, and that is the chosen one. And I have to make sure that this kid gets trained to be the chosen one, or whatever that looks like.
But I think in Qui-Gon's, we'll go down this path. But if Qui-Gon's following the will of the Force would have given him an opportunity to free her at the same time he freed Anakin then. And it didn't. Now he's making the choice of what the will of the Force is by purposefully going and trying to save her.
Well, yes, but I quantified this by saying the only reason he does it's not just like, hey, you know what? I'm not saying like, okay, they get together, they're master and Padawan or master and apprentice. And the very first thing they do is like, you know what, let's go get your mom. I'm not saying that. I'm saying at some point through the course of training, he realizes that what Anakin needs to really tap into his full potential and what's really holding him back is this idea that his mom is living out there. And so he gives into that, right? That's how I quantify it. Not.
Yeah, I guess I don't think that he would give into that because that's not the living Force talking to him. That's his ego. And that's his opinion and his interpretation of what he thinks someone needs. Not necessarily what the Force is telling them what this kid needs. Because the Force could be saying, no, he really needs more discipline. And you need to teach him the things that you learned when you had all these things as a kid. And you need to be more open with him and talk to him about your relationships and talk to Obi-Wan too about this Satine, chick kind of running around because he knows all about that too. Dad sees, and that kind of thing. So I don't know that I don't know that it would be the living Force. And Qui-Gon is very, and I'm not trying to just be arguing with you, although it's fun, but I mean, it's very much, I think Qui-Gon's, really focused in on the will of the Force, but the living Force and what it's trying to tell him, and he follows it. And again, I think, and that's why I went back to, I didn't exactly come here to free slaves. I will try. If the Force wills it, it'll happen. But I'm here because I came across you. and you're kind of what matters in this instance here. So I mean, I get where you're going though, and if there's a path there, I think it's possible. But I think that's really super slippery, and I think the Jedi Order and the Council would have been like, "All right, Qui-Gon,
Yeah, you've gone too far.
Yeah, I think you've kind of outstayed your welcome."
Hmm.
And I don't know that that's good for Anakin either, because that sets Anakin down a very different path, because now he feels responsible for his master's expulsion.
Yeah, I can see that.
Then he becomes Darth Vader and kills everybody.
Okay, last question before we get out of here. What would Palpatine? Who would Palpatine have trained? And so this is assuming that Dooku does not go to the dark side, right? This is the scenario. He never goes to the dark side. So now Palpatine's on the lookout. He doesn't have Darth Maul because he died. Well, he comes back, but that's another story.
Right.
Who would he go after? Anybody on the Jedi Council? Is it somebody like Ventress? Does he go after like Savage Opress? I mean, he's got options, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if he knows all those people exist, because he doesn't really think anything about his assassin, right? I mean, he's very dismissive of it anyway. I think that's probably more of a dig at Dooku than the person, maybe. But I don't think Palpatine's very particular about who he chooses. And there's a really good reason why he chooses them. To that extent, Massage would have been a good choice because there's a history with the Jedi and so on and so forth. But I think Palpatine is patient, though. I think this is one of those times where he would just wait and see how things develop. And we know that he went a while without Dooku too, right?
Right.
So the time between when he lost, well, no, I guess not. I guess Tales of the Jedi cleared that up. So there really was no time lost between there. We kind of assume maybe there was, but yeah, I guess not. But yeah, I think it's still Anakin at some point. And I think he's clear. He's done this alone for a long time anyway. Even with Maul, what was Maul doing? Maul was kind of running errands and complaining.
Yeah, picking up laundry.
And training.
Grabbing drinks at Starbucks, whatever. But yeah, he wasn't like in the fight. That's why he was itching to get into the fight during the Phantom Menace.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he was out, stalking this Padawan just in a kind of a bloodthirst for Jedi blood, right?
Right.
Just to be able to prove his worth. And that didn't really work out when he had a real chance.
Yeah.
But I mean, so I think at some point, I think it still goes back to Anakin. Because again, I think with some of those scenarios that gets presented, a bunch of those still have very clear paths for Anakin to fall. And I think it's, again, kind of the will of the Force that was how it was going to go. And Palpatine, I mean, very manipulative. Opportunities from disappointment.
Yeah.
And
no, I think you nailed it. I think he plays the waiting game. He's a very patient, methodical kind of character. And so what? What's another, however many years?
And I think he's having fun too. I mean, quite honestly, he doesn't smile a lot, but I think he's having a grand old time.
Someone needs to give him that feedback. Palpatine, you need to just smile more.
Yeah. He's like, no, but then they know I'm up to something.
Yeah.
But I mean, oh my gosh. I mean, how many times have we seen him make like really sardonic comments to the Jedi where you just know on the inside, he's like,
mm-hmm.
It's just perfect, Yeah. So
all right. Well,
it was great interest.
So I guess, how would you summarize? Could Qui-Gon have been saved by Dooku? Excuse me, by Dooku.
Other way around. Could Dooku have been saved by Qui-Gon?
So let's start that over and you can edit this out. So final question. So could Qui-Gon have saved Dooku?
I think at the end of the day, probably not. I think there would be some opportunities for them to hopefully slow it, and maybe make some turn. But I think he's old enough now, and there's so many years gone by and a lot of experiences that I don't know that it would have mattered a whole lot. I think it would have had actually more impact on Qui-Gon than it would on Dooku, by having seen what Dooku is becoming and influencing Qui-Gon's decision to go a different path as well. And so in kind of reflection here, I think almost it would be the other way around of, Qui-Gon would have been more influenced by Dooku. But no, I don't think there's any saving Dooku from going down that path. I think he, leaving the Order, he's left to his own devices. And even by being able to phone a friend, I think while Qui-Gon is an amazing friend and would be able to do a lot of that stuff, they would still fundamentally disagree as to what Dooku was doing and how he was progressing and how he was progressing his agenda in the galaxy. And especially if once the Clone Wars erupted, or if the Clone Wars erupted, if he still picked that side on the Separatists, I don't see how Qui-Gon could stand by that. He would still pick up the phone when he called, but I don't know that there was any. I think it would just be full of disappointment for Qui-Gon and more affirmation that he needs to choose a different path for himself that's devoid of Jedi and separatists and politics and all this other stuff. But what about you?
Well, I think at some point Disney Plus will pick up the What If, show. They're going to run that, right? Star Wars What If.
Does this mean I get to officially resurrect it for the Cantina Cast?
Yeah. We've already done that here tonight. And so because they will do that at some point, I'm going to take the opposite view. That way we can say we were right. I'm going to say yes, Qui-Gon could have saved Dooku. Although and I get it, there's a lot that has to happen. And that's really what, these what if scenarios are always tricky because there's a lot of suspension of disbelief and there's certain, mental gymnastics that you kind of have to jump through to get there. Yeah, but I think at the end of the day,
if you flip through a choose your own adventure book, there's a lot of failure even when you avoid failure.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. But yeah, I'm going to go and say yes, that he could have saved him. But I want to quantify this by saying I don't think it doesn't change the fact that that Palpatine would eventually still turn Anakin over to the dark side. Like, to me, that is a constant. It is something that absolutely had to happen, right? So nothing gets altered there. I think the way Qui-Gon gets to him, again, depending, not taking into account that, this is earlier on in Dooku's turn or Dooku's fall from grace and not later down the road, right? So again, preface that. But I think it is Qui-Gon. I think it's Dooku reaching out to Qui-Gon saying, there's something in here that's bothering me. And you're the only person, I know that over the years, you've grounded me. You've been there for me, that you can kind of help me see through all this stuff. Right. And I think it's through that communication that I think Qui-Gon then feels that this is the will of Force, that this is the calling, right? Nothing happens for a reason, without a reason is really where he's coming from. He takes that opportunity, helps him get to a better place. Now, again, what that looks like, I don't know, but I do feel like in that scenario, I think he would bring him back from bring him back from the dark side. I think he's still going to always have his problems with the Jedi Order. I think we've made it clear that they weren't going to change any of that, nor would they change anything that's happening in the Senate. So what that looks like in terms of who Dooku is and who Qui-Gon is at that point is very nebulous for me. But nonetheless, I think he's able to prevent that. I still think a lot of these other things still happen. I think the Clone Wars still happens. I think Palpatine, if he doesn't just hold out into Anakin's ear, he finds some other patsy that he's going to use to manipulate to start the Clone Wars. Maybe it is Sifo Dyas, right? He's still around. That guy was off his rocker to begin with anyways, or he's not really the most likable kind of, he was always a little weird. So, I mean, I think some of those events still happen, but in that scenario, I think I want to give Qui-Gon the benefit of the doubt to say that he would know the right things to do and say in order to bring somebody like his master, who he knows very well, back over to the light side, or at least prevent him from going too far into the dark side. How about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's arguments to be made there that there's opportunity at the very least.
At the very least. So, all right. Well, you got both sides of it, and yeah, you're welcome. But no, this is a good discussion.
Is that really how we should do these? Was it like doing more debate style? One of us picks one side, the other one picks. Is like going like in high school again with debate.
Yeah, it's Lincoln Douglas debate is what it's called.
Right. Yeah.
LD. Yeah, we can do that. I'll build my case files and we should get Ryan from Ryan C. Showers in here. This is what he does. So
yeah, sure.
I'll get some coaching from him. Now, this is a good discussion, and thanks for everybody that stuck around for the show that we thought would be 45 minutes turned out to be an hour and a half. So, but that's what happens when we get to talking and yapping.
Yeah. Speaking of which, so thanks again to everyone who came out in the live chat with us: Steph, Jonathan, Sky, Music Train, JJ Skywalker, Lauren, Caleb. Good to see you. Derpy 501st, and then Beacon Halliday came in there, and he had said at the end here, she said, "Long-time listener, no need for reply. Just a bit of a thrill to get to say hi or say live or say hi live. Maybe we'll say that. Thanks for what you guys do. Just know there's a guy out there in his Outback fruit orchard listening keenly. We appreciate keen listens. We don't get many of those. At least not many admissions to keen listens at the very least. You're on mute again.
That's awesome. Thanks for jumping in to say hello. Appreciate that. All right. What else? You got shout outs?
I just did those.
Did you do those? I wasn't paying attention. I was actually running. I was running to go grab my figure because I was gonna get it ready for the next Patreon show. So I was like, yeah, Jonesy's doing his thing. I'll come back here in a little bit and pretend I know what's going on. Clearly, I don't. So with that,
so we'll see you on Thursday with episode 3 of the Bad Batch breakdown. What is it? The Solitary Clone?
Solitary Clone.
Solitary Clone. There we go.
Yep.
So we'll see you guys Thursday evening.
Yep. Thank you.
You're still listening? Wow, that's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property, and all that other good, fun stuff, but I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me, and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what, so that's your disclaimer.